Welcome to the Soil Health Nexus Digital Cafe. My name is Ann Nardi, and I'll be the facilitator for today's session. I work with the North Central Region Water Network and the Soil Health Nexus at the University of Wisconsin Extension. Excuse me. For those of you who are new to the Soil Health Nexus, we are a university-led team. We're a multi-state team with representation from all 12 of the North Central region states, and we're dedicated to increasing access to research-based soil health information, knowledge, extension, and resources. All of our resources, as well as all of our webinars and recordings of those webinars, as well as the Soil Health Toolbox, with a suite of soil health, research-based soil health information is available at our website, soilhealthnexus.org. Excited you could join us for today's digital cafe. So how this works, we're going to have a presentation today. Today's presentation is on the Iowa State University's cover crop economics tool. We'll have about a 20 to 30 minute presentation followed by Q&A. So if you do have questions for our presenter, please put them in the chat and we can go over them after her presentation. We can also have you unmute at that time and ask your question that way. After we have the presentation and time for group Q&A, we will break out into breakout rooms as time allows. Those breakout rooms are grouped by your occupation or your role. So we usually have them based off of researcher, educator, agency, farmer, and student. And the idea behind these is that we gather as kind of folks working within the ag space, within soil health, and talk about the presentation, talk about our reflections, our next steps, our follow-up questions with fellow, like-minded folks that are interested in soil health from across the region and beyond. So we will gather in those as time becomes available or as time's available, and you can find those at the bottom of your screen under breakout rooms. So today's presentation, I'm really excited to have Ann Johannes here. She's with Iowa State University. She's a program specialist there and also works with the Ag Decision Maker tool. And that's one of the reasons we wanted her to join us today. For those of you who have kept up with the Nexus and some of our events, we did host a regional a regional conservation finance workshop back in September in Arlington, Wisconsin, focusing on the economics of several soil health or conservation to ag practices. And one of the things we found out through that, we did a large scale survey of ag educators is, what tools y'all are really interested in hearing about. And the Iowa State's cover crop economics tool was at the top of that list. So that's why we wanted to have Ann here talk a little bit about that tool, what goes into it, what are the assumptions behind it, how it can be used by you in the field. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to her.
Okay, thank you so much. So yes, I'm Ann Johannes, and I am in Iowa. I'm a campus employee, but I'm housed off campus at one of our research farms. And when you asked me how many weeks ago, I mean, it's been quite a while ago, about sharing the tool, I said, sure. All of you are the experts, probably more so than me, on what goes into it. But back in 2017, 2018, I was the person behind the scenes. They would tell me what they wanted the tool to do, and then I would make it happen. And so I can definitely speak to how the tool works and some tips in using it. How it best meets your needs, right? And so I wanted to get started with just a little bit of a why. And so I minimized there it goes. Um, okay, couple things. This one I always like to share when I'm talking about implementing conservation practices. I know this is a super busy picture, but it's how to start the conversation. And so when we're talking about cover crops, that those decisions need to be made well ahead of when implementation occurs, right? And so I've talked with some groups that maybe are very focused on conservation, but don't know so much about the calendar that farmers, their decision is. And so this is just my visual of, farmers are busy year round. They're making decisions constantly. It's kind of, every crop is really a 3-year cycle as far as planning, actually putting that crop in the ground, harvesting that crop and marketing it, right? I mean, it's a multi-year cycle. And so letting folks know that, when we're talking about cover crops, that we have all the tools, but we maybe need to start those conversations early. And then the next thing that adds to that, especially in Iowa, and if you're not familiar with the census of ag data on land that is under a rental agreement and you're in a different state, I'm happy to point you toward where you could also download this data. But in Iowa, right at half of farmland in our state is under a rental agreement. And so I just like to point that out too, that it's something to keep in mind too when having conversations about cover crops and conservation, that how it impacts a rental agreement, how, we get questions from landowners who want to implement cover crops with their tenant, or we get tenants who, come to that. They want to make that decision themselves and implement them no matter what the landowner, if they have their support or not. And so just knowing that that needs to be part of the conversation and something to be well aware of. So let's dig into where you can find the tool. I thought that better be step one, right? So Ag Decision Maker is our library of farm management materials from Iowa State. And so every month we update with a newsletter. We have several hundred information files. I think I'm at 220 some of these decision tools that are all Excel based. We're working with a group now to make some of our decision tools web-based, and so a person doesn't have to have Excel to make them happen. But the benefit of still providing these templates in Excel is that you can download them, you can save them, most of them are, if you're comfortable with Excel, they're not password protected. We protect them just to make it, that you can't mess up a formula or accidentally delete something out that needs to be there. But if you're comfortable um, making changes, then they're really a template. I will always put in that disclaimer. If you unprotect one of our Excel files and then call me, I can only help you to a certain point, right? When you've started to kind of move things around. And so just a caveat to that. And so here is our homepage, and I can go through, we have all these different kind of head topics. I can tell you that our economics of cover crops is under crops and cost and returns. It's in the profitability section. But when you actually go to find this, you're going to type into the search box and you're going to type cover crops, right? That's just what we're all going to do. And so it's going to be the first thing that comes up. Okay. And so you're going to download the tool. And I'm going to reshare hopefully it opens. I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare to make sure I got the right one. There it is. Okay. It wouldn't let me share my whole screen today, and so I'm sharing my application. And so now, Christina and Ann can tell me if they're not seeing the Excel file, but I'm pretty sure you are.
No,
And
no,
no,
no.
what are you seeing?
I'm seeing the website still.
No, I see the Excel file.
I see
Ah,
Excel.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Maybe you got ahead of me and you're trying to find it on the website.
no.
Okay. But if you can't see it, pop in the chat and I'll reshare. But here is how the tool will open up. And if you I've already had this open. Okay, they can see it. Awesome. Oh, but some of them can't see it. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and try again.
Yeah, that is odd. I was seeing the Excel sheet, so.
Okay, so we're going to select this. And it should say economics of cover crops.
Yeah.
It's telling me this is what I'm sharing. All right.
Yep, I see it now.
Awesome. Okay. So opens up with just a generic kind of intro screen. Just when I was looking through still, we first developed this tool. It was released in 2018. William Edwards, who's a retired extension economist, I've already talked to him twice today, so he's not very good at retirement. But he was one of the folks that were involved. Alejandro Plastina, who was an extension economist with our department, who is now the director for a center in Missouri, and then Megan Filbert, who was with Practical Farmers of Iowa. And she really brought in the livestock component, and now she's with a private firm. And so they've all kind of moved along. But like I said, I was involved in the background of putting this tool together. And when I look at the other things available still today, um, I can find partial budgets and I can find lots of tools that help the producer select different mixes of cover crops or, different pieces. But this is still the one tool that really tries and kind of bring everything together and lets you kind of compare some different options. And so I really think that it's still kind of unique out in the scope of things. And so as we walk through this, each of these is a link to the different tabs. And then these down here that now I think you can see, those are links to some resources. And so I'm just going to click on, there's 3 different options. We have just a cover crop budget. And then there are 2 that factor in grazing. And so the first one is kind of a projection. So a grazing cover crops budget to look at what you might want to do, and then a second one that looks at results, and so you can put in, they're similar, and so we're going to walk through each one. Okay. So on the cover crop budget, so the most important thing I think when using this is that, especially if somebody is kind of just starting the process, is this first column, right? Is the things to consider. And so anything you put into a tool, the results are going to be as good as what you put into it, right? We can get rough ideas and we can get a rough estimate as the result. But if I have more details, then I'm going to get better results from the tool, right? And so a couple of different ways that you can use this. Like I said, that left-hand column and just looking at the things to consider that somebody might not have is to me super duper important. Okay, so then if we look across the tool, this tool allows for 5 different fields. And you can think about this in 2 different ways. So I have a farm and I'm going to try 5 different types of cover crops on 5 different fields. Okay. And then it's going to give me the total for my whole farm, right? So if I have, 5 different mixes, or the other way that I think you might find this interesting to be able to use this is, let's say I'm actually looking at 5 different practices on the same field and want to compare the outcome of that. And so in my example here, I have 5 different sized fields, but let's say I have 50 acres and I want to look at, different costs of seed, different types of termination for each, what those might all need. So we can look at this kind of in 2 different ways. So 5 different fields or comparing 5 different kind of practices on the same field. So then so just some details. And like I said, the best part of this is that if a producer is using this, they can save this, they can update it year after year. With these Excel files, like I can, move or copy, I can make a copy of this exact page if I wanted to. And so I can do the same thing, right? On a new page, and all those formulas carry over. So, okay, types of cover crop to be seeded, total acres to be seeded, and then we can do a kind of a mix of different costs for those seeds. If you're filling this out and you actually have like more than one, you can kind of average it out in there. And then the next part here, okay, are you custom hiring this work done? Then it has the link over on the right. So I tried to zoom in so that you could kind of see, because these get pretty small when you're looking at an Excel file on a screen. But there is a link in here to our Iowa custom rate survey. And so you can look at custom rates for drilling or seeding, because if you're hiring that done, right, you want to use a custom rate that's going to account for that custom operator's labor, their equipment, right? So use the custom rate. But if it's being done by the operator, we're going to factor in their variable cost on that equipment. And then there's a second part here to factor in their labor. So the labor per hour, and then hours per field. And so that's something when I was kind of working through this, just to note that it's hours per field. A lot of times we do hours per acre when we're filling things out, but this one, make sure it's by field. And then it's going to tell me, okay, this is right what our costs are for establishing the cover crop. And I feel like that's something that's I've seen in other tools, but then it doesn't keep going. Okay. So the next part is, what are those added costs? Our custom rate survey does have aerial seeding in the last year. It's a newer question we've asked. And so there is aerial seeding on the Iowa State custom rate. So the next thing is added costs for terminating the cover crop. So this is beyond what a producer might have been doing already, right? So this is beyond their normal practices. Everything in here is going to be the addition that we're trying to factor in. And so additional herbicide for termination, again, we're going to look at, is it being custom hired or is it being done by the operator? If there's added tillage, same thing. And then again, similar, that added hours per field. Okay. And so I can tell you both of these, if you can make adjustments as you're going through this. That's the great thing, is that, let's say, I want to switch between this work being done by a custom operator and instead have it being done by the operator, right? And I can see this in here. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that link in there in the chat box. And so from that page, you can download the Excel file right there. Okay, you can still see the Excel file, right? Because I clicked off it. So pop in the chat if you don't see it right now.
We can see it.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, you can make changes if it's being done by, that's the best part, right? Is that you can go through this and it's automatically going to make all those calculations for you. So here I made a quick adjustment and we can see our changes here for terminating the cover crop. Okay. Next thing is other income or costs. Okay. So what is my yield impact? And that can vary by crop. It can vary by variety. It can vary by year. Like there's a lot of gray area in that. And so that's where absolutely, the experts that are using these are going to know or be able to adjust accordingly for what they want to look at. But just a note on what is the crop following the cover crop, and the expected yield in an average year. So, what's the long-term average for your corn, your soybeans, or whatever that crop might be, and then the expected selling price for that crop. And then we're going to make an adjustment. Is there an impact on yield? Do we want to factor that in? If not, I can just put in a 0, and it's just going to take that part out, right? Or if it's going to have a negative, maybe I want to look at what would a 5% or 1% yield benefit be? What would it, if it was going to negatively impact yield, right? To see what's the difference in that yield variation. So same thing, right? That it's automatically going to do that for me. And then are there cost share payments? Are there crop insurance discounts? Like I know in Iowa, right, we have some state programs. Every state's kind of unique that way. And so you can adjust. This is definitely not Iowa specific. Like there's some notes in here and there's links to some Iowa resources, but this definitely could be applied anywhere. So if there's cost share payments being received, if there's a crop insurance premium discount, and then maybe it's not on the whole field, maybe it's just on, maybe there's a max on the acres that's being applied to. So how many acres are actually receiving that discount or cost share payment? Then added costs are there other things that this tool hasn't accounted for? Is there irrigation fuel? Is there do you want to factor in a benefit for erosion control? There's things when we're doing cover crops that you can't necessarily maybe put a value on in the short term. They have long-term benefit, but could you put if if you wanted to consider, is there a long-term benefit that you wanted to factor in there? That's what that section kind of allows for. And then we have just the summary, right? We pulled all these different fields down. It's going to tell me just a summary of that information of, what's the change in the yield, the added income, the added costs, and then what's my total economic loss or gain. And then there's just kind of this nice little quick calculation. If I wanted the things I put into this tool, what is the average yield increase needed based on the prices I put in there for this to break even? So just kind of a little side calculation that can help in providing some information there. And then I kind of mentioned that there's notes along the side here. So as a user is entering things in here, just some helpful tips, and then links to those outside resources too. Okay, so that's just your, just doing cover crops, not factoring in livestock. And so then the next tools are where I think this tool is much different or unique compared to some of the other things that are kind of out in the scope of research. And so this is the tab that looks at grazing or harvesting. So it starts out very similar and I guess it's important to note that each of these tabs works on its own. They are not pulling information from the different tabs. And so if you're opening this up, you're going to pick the tab that applies most to the situation. You can, enter things into all of them if it's relevant, but just know that each is kind of working on its own. So this one, again, we have very similar costs for establishing the cover crop, costs for terminating the cover crop, and then that same section of those other income or costs. So those are all set up the same as that first tab. Where this one gets unique is that we can look at grazing cover crops. And so factoring in, if you're considering grazing cover crops, have you considered the cost for fencing? Have you considered the cost for additional waters? So all the things that might be factored in to the livestock piece of this, right? So again, more information on labor. Is there extra labor or is there labor saved? And so this one, you have to enter in both numbers there. And then again, a value for that operator labor, specifically on the livestock side of things. So the question about property taxes. So maybe you might need to clarify this. Like, you're going to pay property taxes regardless, right? So if my field, so that's kind of a sunk cost either way, is kind of how I would look at that. So that's not going to make my decision unless there's like some unique program that's going to benefit me for my property taxes, and that I might not be answering the question correctly. Okay. So back to then I've entered in my information for fences, whether I made changes there. There is this kind of short, I'm going to scroll over here to the right just a little bit in case you don't have fencing information. We have just kind of a rough average for different types of fences. And we just went through this and updated it actually. And so this is here in the last couple of months, a little bit of updated fence costs there. And then there's a link to the actual publication that comes from if you wanted to get more details on that. So then once I finish my fencing, I'm going to look at what is the value of feed replaced by grazing cover crops. And so put in an actual or rough idea on the value of, the equivalent quality of hay, percent of dry matter. And so this is going to calculate, again, like how much dry matter is provided by the cover crop, and then it calculates how much is there in that entire field. So for the 25, how many acres, 50 acres in this example, like how much feed is actually available there. And then if they're in their fall and then in the spring. And then the next step here is how much feed do the animals I'm putting on this on the cover crops actually need, right? Am I supplementing feed, or am I going to need to supplement feed for the animals that I have there? So um, up until this point, this tool has been looking at those 5 fields. When you get to this section about the livestock, it allows for 5 different types of livestock, right? If you want to factor in how much these different animals at different stages are eating. And so this is not field specific. This is in general, like how many animals and how much feed are you providing across this example, okay? And so there is a note here that it doesn't apply to the individual fields, but it calculates how much dry matter per day and then gives me how many days they might be out there grazing, and then I get a summary. And I will tell you, this part is definitely the part where I was told, here's what I would like this tool to do. And I'm like, all right, we can make that happen. And so I might not be able to answer really detailed questions on the grazing part, but I definitely think that there's a lot of value in being able to factor that in. But then also, what if I'm not grazing? What if I am harvesting for forage to feed those animals, right? So I'm not putting them out there. Then I don't have fencing costs, but I do have costs associated with the harvesting. And so we have 2 different sections you can fill out. So I could have left this top part blank. So all this section right here, right? If I'd left that all empty, then I would instead be calculating what if I am harvesting that for forage to feed my livestock, right? And so this allows that calculation to be done. And so is how many acres of that cover crop are you harvesting? What are you going to take off of it? What's the value of it? And so then we also have to factor in what's the cost to harvest it, right? And so again, thinking through all the extras that somebody might not consider when really looking at the big picture across their operation. And similar summary as that first tab with income, added costs, and then what's that total gain or loss per year. Okay. And then just switch over to the grazing cover crops results set up very similar. So it's more here's what I think I might do, and then here's what I did, right? And so I can kind of use this beginning and end, project, and then look at how did this actually come out. And so again, set up very similar that we're going to look at same top section, grazing cover crops. I'm going to fall graze. I can factor in fall grazing, spring grazing. How long were those animals actually out there? What animals were out there? And look at what's the value of the feed replaced by that cover crop. And then maybe I didn't graze. Instead, I did harvest it for forage. And so I can account for that. And it, again, ran through this one really fast, but very, very similar. But it's looking at how long were those animals actually out there, or what did I actually pull off that field? So I think I'm coming right up on 30 minutes. I can talk a long time about an Excel file. There are a lot of resources, both in this tool, right, along the right side, or on this front tab, that introduction tab, resources from our Practical Farmers of Iowa research that they have done. Our Center for Ag and Rural Development has quite a few resources on cover crops. They have a partial budget, several different research projects over the years that do have actual results from the Midwest. And so, if you're looking for, that's the thing about, sometimes our decision tools, they have example numbers in there. You can adjust them. This one, the numbers in there are rough ideas, right? But they're not from actual surveys or actual on-farm results. And so that's something to consider is that, again, I go back to one of the things I said first, that your results from this are going to be, you can put in general ideas and get a general result, or you can put in very specific numbers, and then the results are going to be that much more detailed. So, all right. I'm right at my 20 to 30 minutes, Anne.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We do have some questions here in the chat, so I'll go ahead and ask those here. Oh, I know, let's see here. Brian's curious. So does the custom rate that you talked about, does that have options for flown by plane or drone?
Yes. And so in fact, since I'm going to stop sharing, and then, because since we can, right, that if I can share again,
Yeah.
um, do, do, do. Share. There we go. Okay, the Iowa State Custom Rate Survey comes out every March. And so I can just show you that we have different sections within the survey as far as like field preparation, planting, and so there is actually within the planting, drilling, and seeding section, it asks aerial seeding of cover crop and drilling cover crop seeds specifically just in the last couple of years, that information has been on there. Whenever we add something, we just the number of results we get slowly increases, right, when it's a new item. And so those items are new in the last 2 to 3 years, I think.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's very helpful though. It's cool that it does include that because I know that's been a growing practice here. So Scott did have the question about property taxes, which you touched on. Scott, feel free to unmute if you wanted to describe more of that, of what you were thinking. Did we miss what your question was there?
Oh, thanks, Ann. So the other Ann, Joanne's, okay, well, I don't know how Iowa does this, but in Kansas, they actually put a property value by productivity and soils. And I didn't know for sure. That's the reason why I brought up property tax. We may have areas where your soils aren't very good, and so it's not a higher value, it's not a high value versus going into other more tillable soils or whatever, more productive soils. And one of the problems we had was a lot of the folks were saying, well, if we do these things, um, especially for these cover crops, they were wondering about if there was some way that you could add that in that whole discussion about your bottom line, because they use that property tax at the end of the year for their ROI too.
Okay. So I think that's going to be state specific because the way Iowa property taxes are calculated is based on the soils, um, and I realize is similar, but I know Iowa is just unique compared to other states.
Okay.
But if there is going to be an impact, that they need to factor in, that is what that other section allows for. That you can, those unique things that it's not capturing somewhere else, that is what that section would be.
Yeah.
And you could put that on a dollar per acre.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, rental rates are really a question when it comes to
Yeah.
property taxes.
And
And so that's one of the things I was thinking about here.
And you could also like this one, as I was going through this, I noticed some little details that I've missed. Is that like and I'm going to make that change, because this one has it. So it does have in the notes here on the grazing cover crops. Is there a reduction in your cash rent to consider, right? So
Okay.
what if I have 5 fields and I own this one, but I rent this one? When I was talking about, kind of being able to compare, because we always talk about the learning curve with cover crops and that we encourage producers, if they're maybe start small. And so maybe they're considering, do I put this on a rented farm or do I put it
Yep.
on land I own? And so that allows, again, in that other section, is my landowner going to, right, are they going to help support this change? Because some definitely have shown an interest in that, where we have Iowa landowners who are like, I would like my tenant to implement cover crops,
Yes.
and I'm willing to take a break to make sure that happens. Um, and so that's what that section, yep, that's where that could be factored in.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is helpful. In the chat here, this is interesting. People are saying, wait, is there actually a crop insurance discount for using cover crops?
I
So
like that Liz threw that in there, like, yep, we sure have that here in Iowa. Maybe if
yeah,
you don't have that in your state, ask. So it's a $5 per acre. She can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure it's still $5 per acre. And oh, there, and Wisconsin has one too. So yeah, look
yeah,
into that's the thing is that there might be things in your state that you're just not aware of, right? And so it's asking what programs are out there to help support this and can they be stacked? Because sometimes they can be, and then sometimes they cannot. And that might change year to year too. And so what you think you knew, um, may be different.
yeah, that's a great point. And especially with these cover crops tool, they're relatively new, right? Is how I would describe them. And that I don't know how long Iowa's and Illinois has been, that Wisconsin's new. So they haven't been around that long. So there could be, places that are getting them added that you're not
Right.
aware of, right? I think that's one of the things that I'm coming to mind. David has a question. He's curious, are all the values added to the spreadsheet input by the user, or are some reported by actual survey results?
So when I went through this and I just kind of freshened it up. When you asked me to talk about this, I'm like, oh, I should really, it had been a while since I'd gone through it. And so I will say, don't take what is in this as the answer. That's so when they developed this tool, the information that was put in it was, I mean, we're making a long-term assumption here on my yield. Well, that's not going to be the same for every area of the state. We're looking at grand averages here. Um, the information that was put in this was put in there with experience and knowledge, but it's not going to apply to every situation. And so use the resources that are linked. So like those the custom rate survey, I actually did put in this year's or the 2024 custom rate numbers. So these numbers you're seeing right now are from our 2024 custom rate survey.
Mm.
And then, but I didn't go through and I could have looked at our estimated cost of crop production and updated my variable costs, but I actually did not. Um, and my hours per field, like that's going to vary by my size of equipment or the size of the field. And so they're helpful to it really gives you a visual for how it works and what you might want to put in there. But if I'm filling this out, I'm going to want to make adjustments to my situation.
Great, great point. Liz is putting some information about cover crop premiums in there, including some that might be useful to other states outside of Iowa, costsharecompare.com. Because we're specifically looking about if Minnesota has something similar. So yeah, folks are having some discussion, which is great. That's one of the reasons the discussion is there. I know for me, and I did have a question, or I guess I just wanted you to talk a little bit more about the results tab, because I think that's another thing that makes this tool a little bit different in my mind, or the results sheet there, and that like so many of these tools are predictive only. And so I feel like that is one thing that could be helpful, is that you can go back as a results and kind of track that over time. Do you have any knowledge of like how this is being used, if folks are using this year over year, or that's working?
Oh, I don't. I could have looked up how this has been used over the last couple of years, right? Just downloads and I but I don't have a great answer on that other than um like because of the results page, like you can put in everything is going to be year to year, right? Like every year is going to be unique. With if you changed your cover crop, what varieties you're using, or when it was put in, or if it germinated better. They're just things that factor in every year. I think drought and so especially with then the grazing, like how much forage was actually out there for those animals, how long were you able to leave them out there, that this tool allows you to account for.
Yeah. Oh, another message here. There's a
I like
reimbursement program in Minnesota other than cover crop insurance, but don't know the name of it. Something like Soil Health Farmers Alliance. Okay, so some of this conversation going on about what those
I like it.
may be, especially in Minnesota or in your own particular state.
And that's what I put in my notes, as I was preparing for this. Like, I really hope that everybody online can help because I
Yeah.
don't know. And so that makes me happy to see that they know more than definitely know more than I do. I'm going to copy this when we're done so that I know more.
Great. Any other questions specifically for Anne?
Well, yeah, and that Lamont put in there, like if you have better numbers, absolutely, right? Is that this gives you the visual of how the tool works. But the best part of this is that it allows the user to make it work for them. And so I think that's, what I would want to end on is that we try and provide you the framework to make better decisions or know more information. And so that's what the goal of this is. And to allow them to save it and make changes over time, right? To be able to revisit it. Um, so
Right, right. Which is that utility of the Excel platform for sure, even though sometimes for certain folks it could be clunky or confusing. It does have a lot of that utility to it. Let's see, Randy's saying, and you mentioned the estimated cost of crop production, and there are several other good resources as good starting points, and he's sharing those as well. The one he specifically shared is also from Ag Decision Maker, so I'm sure.
yeah, thanks for the plug. Oh, sure. So, well, that map I made myself. But I am
That was a good map. I was gonna say, I haven't seen that. Like, that's not readily available for every state. You'd have to make that, right?
right. So the data behind that comes from the NAS query system. And so if you have a state in mind, like I'm happy to help you dig into where that is, or if you're not familiar here, I'll put this in the chat box. So there's the query system where you can drill down to percent of acres rented by county. And I think because it comes from the census, like if it's survey data from NAS, it might not be available in every state the same way. But because it's from the census, I think every state by county or district is going to be able to have that information so that you can create help. And I could help. If you send me an email, I can help you with that. So.
Awesome. That is always need more folks that really love where to. Gabe is curious where to access the spreadsheet. So we'll put that map in there, that link in there that was provided earlier. Anne, when you wouldn't mind stop sharing your screen. I'm going to share mine real quick. Oh, Anne's got the link ready. Wonderful. Okay, so we do have some time now, so I do want to break out into breakout rooms here. And so just a quick note in terms of what we can talk about. I mentioned what those groups would be. And it's folks that are also working in ag and want to talk about what's their impression of the topic, any kind of research or any other tools you've seen similar to this. If it would they be complements to this? How are they different? Wouldn't be more helpful to you? How you could use this in your programming or in your work? Also, you are also welcome to share any other future ideas you have for webinars. Myself and Christina Curell and others of the Soil Health Nexus team are always open to hearing your thoughts on future topics. We have this digital cafe monthly. In fact, next month it's going to be February 19th. It's usually the third Wednesday of the month. And we're going to be talking about the Kansas Healthy Watershed Program with Scott and Candy Thomas. So again, we feature lots of different topics. We have topics, whether they're research, programming, tools like this. And so we are very open to hearing your thoughts in terms of what you'd like to hear about. The whole point of this is increasing connectivity between soil health and ag staff, as well as increasing those research-based tools, knowledge, and extension and programming. So with that, I'm gonna stop the share and stop the recording and open up the breakout rooms for folks.
They're all open.
All right, great. Thank you.
So please go